Welcome to our deep dive into literary theory. We'll be taking excerpts from Contemporary Literary Theory. It's a pretty dense academic book, but we're going to extract some real gems from it, whether you're prepping for a seminar or just curious about how we make meaning from texts. We're going to explore different schools of thought, how they approach this challenge.
Yeah, it's fascinating how literary theory, it's really shifted from just focusing on the text itself to recognizing the complex interplay between the reader, the author, and the text. It's not just deciphering the words on the page anymore. It's about understanding all those forces that shape how we interpret it.
It's like there's this whole ecosystem around a book. And one of the first theories that really shook things up was reader response theory. It argues that meaning isn't just there in the text, it's created when the reader interacts with it. Does that diminish the role of the author then?
That's the big question, isn't it? Reader response theory really grapples with that. It doesn't completely invalidate the author's role, but it certainly complicates it. Instead of one single meaning, there's this dynamic interplay between what the author intended and how readers with their own diverse backgrounds and experiences receive the work.
So the text becomes like a springboard for individual interpretation.
Exactly. And within reader response theory, different branches explore this dynamic in various ways. For example, phenomenology. It delves into how our individual consciousness shapes our understanding of everything around us, including art.
Our source material mentions Husserl and Heidegger as these pioneers of phenomenology. They believed that our perception actually shapes reality. So two people could read the same text and come away with totally different interpretations. Isn't that a little too subjective, though? How can we even have a shared understanding of a text if meaning is so fluid?
That's the heart of the debate, isn't it? While phenomenology emphasizes that subjective nature of experience, it also acknowledges that we exist in a shared world, which leads to commonalities in our interpretations. Take, for example, the concept of horizon of expectations, introduced by reception theorist Hans Robert Jauss. He argued that readers in a specific historical period, they share certain assumptions and expectations that shape how they read and interpret texts.
So even though our individual responses might vary, there's still the shared cultural and historical lens that influences our reading.
Exactly. Reading a Jane Austen novel today will likely evoke different responses than it did for readers back in Austen's time, because our understanding of social norms, gender roles, literary conventions, it's all evolved, and it influences how we interpret the text.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about what's in our heads, but also about the historical and cultural baggage we bring to the text. And then there's Wolfgang Iser, who took this idea of reader participation a step further with his concept of gaps or blanks in texts.
Oh yeah, Iser argued that these gaps are intentional. Authors leave these spaces for readers to fill in, using their own imagination and knowledge, to create a more complete understanding of the work. It's almost a collaboration between author and reader, a co-creation of meaning.
So the author provides the blueprint, but the reader builds the house.
In a way, yes, but it does raise questions about where those boundaries lie. Does this mean anything goes? Can a reader just impose any meaning they want on a text? This is where American critics like Stanley Fish came in, with the concept of interpretive communities.
Right, Fish argued that we don't interpret in isolation, we do it as part of these groups, communities that share similar assumptions and reading strategies. He suggests that these shared practices, they really influence and even constrain our interpretations. It's like, even though we each have our own perspective, we're also products of our social and cultural contexts.
Exactly. And this leads to a larger question that has really haunted literary theory. Does a text have any inherent meaning at all? Or is meaning solely a product of the reader's mind?
That's a question without a simple answer. And it shows how reader response theory really opened up this new way of thinking about the relationship between reader and text. But reader response isn't the only game in town, is it? How does structuralism fit into this evolution of literary theory?
Structuralism marked a shift away from individual interpretation and toward understanding the underlying systems and structures that shape how we create meaning, not just in literature, but in all aspects of culture.
Like searching for the hidden grammar of meaning-making.
Exactly. One of the key figures in this movement was Ferdinand de Saussure, a linguist who argued that language is a system of signs where meaning is created through difference in relationships.
So a word like cat only makes sense because it's not dog or hat or mat. It's defined by what it isn't, rather than by some inherent quality.
Precisely. And this concept of differential meaning extends beyond individual words to encompass larger structures, like narrative. Vladimir Propp, for instance, He analyzed Russian folk tales and discovered these recurring patterns and character types, the hero, the villain, the helper, suggesting that stories, even across different cultures, often follow certain universal blueprints.
So there's like an underlying code to storytelling, a set of rules that we're not even conscious of.
That's the structuralist argument, and this approach can be applied to other cultural forms too, like myths. Claude Levi-Strauss used structuralism to analyze myths from different cultures, and he found that they often express deep-seated cultural anxieties and resolutions through symbolic oppositions, like good versus evil, or nature versus culture.
It's fascinating how structuralism tries to uncover these hidden patterns and structures that shape how we understand the world, but it seems potentially limiting too. If we're always looking for these universal archetypes, do we risk overlooking what makes individual texts unique?
That's a valid critique, and it's one that later theories like post-structuralism address. But before we go there, we need to consider another major school of thought that emerged in the 20th century, Marxist theory.
Marxist theory brings a whole new dimension to literary analysis. It focuses on how literature reflects and is influenced by social and economic and power structures. Does that mean every text becomes a political statement?
Not necessarily, but Marxist theory encourages us to examine how social and economic forces shape both the creation and the interpretation of literature. It asks us to consider questions like, whose interests are being served by this text? What ideologies are being reinforced or challenged?
Our source material mentions socialist realism as an example of how literature can be explicitly used to promote a particular political agenda. In the Soviet Union, for example, art was often seen as a tool for advancing communist ideals, but there were also dissenting voices within Marxist theory, right?
Absolutely. Critics like Georg Lukács championed realism as a way to accurately portray social conditions and inspire change, while Bertolt Brecht argued that art should alienate audiences, making them question the status quo rather than passively accepting it. The Frankfurt School, with thinkers like Adorno and Benjamin, also explored how art could be a site of resistance against dominant capitalist culture.
So there's a debate within Marxist theory about whether art should reflect reality or challenge it.
Precisely. And this tension between reflection and critique highlights that complex relationship between art and society that Marxist theory tries to unpack.
It's interesting how each of these theories builds upon or challenges the ones that came before it. So where does deconstruction fit into all of this?
Deconstruction emerges as this radical critique of the idea that language can really represent reality. In any stable or objective way, it challenges those very foundations of Western thought, questioning those binary oppositions, like good versus evil, male versus female, that we often take for granted.
I've heard the term difference associated with deconstruction. It sounds like it has something to do with the instability of meaning. Can you explain that a bit further?
Difference. It's a term coined by the philosopher Jacques Derrida. And it really encapsulates that idea that meaning is constantly deferred, never fully present. It's not that words have no meaning, but that their meaning is always relational, dependent on context, and on a chain of other words and concepts.
Like a never-ending game of linguistic hot potato.
Yeah, kind of. Derrida argued that this instability is inherent in language itself, and he saw it as a liberating force, a way to break free from the tyranny of fixed meanings and absolute truths.
But how do we actually apply deconstruction to the analysis of literature? Does it just become a free-for-all of interpretation?
Deconstruction doesn't lead to arbitrary interpretations. Instead, it encourages us to look closely at how texts actually undermine their own intended meanings through those internal contradictions and ambiguities. It's about looking for those moments where a text deconstructs itself, revealing that inherent instability of language and the impossibility of arriving at a single definitive meaning. Critics like Paul de Man and Jeffrey Hartman were key figures in applying these principles to literary texts.
So instead of looking for a unified message or theme, deconstruction encourages us to focus on the tensions and contradictions within a text.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that meaning is always in flux, always open to reinterpretation. And this leads us to post-structuralism, which further blurs those lines between author text and reader, emphasizing that fluidity and instability of meaning.
It sounds like post-structuralism takes some of the core insights of deconstruction and applies them to a wider range of cultural phenomena.
That's a great way to put it. Post-structuralism recognizes that meaning isn't inherent in texts or objects, but is constantly being created and negotiated through our interactions with them. It's a dynamic and evolving process, and it acknowledges that there are no fixed points of reference, no ultimate truths to be uncovered.
This is all pretty mind-bending. We've covered a lot of ground already. From reader response theory to deconstruction and post-structuralism, it seems like each theory offers a different lens through which to view literature, highlighting different aspects of that complex process of meaning making.
It's true, we have been moving quickly. But that's the nature of a deep dive. And we're only just getting started. There are many more fascinating theories to explore, each offering its own unique insights into how we engage with literature and culture.
Well, I'm definitely ready to dive deeper.
Before we move on from post-structuralism, it's important to remember that its influence, well, it went beyond just literature. It really permeated other fields, like history, for example.
You're talking about new historicism, right? Our source material highlights it as a prime example of how post-structuralist ideas, particularly from Michel Foucault, reshaped the study of history. Instead of seeing history as this neutral record of facts, it argues that history is always a product of interpretation.
Exactly. New historicism challenges that idea that we can access the past objectively. It emphasizes that historical narratives are always shaped by the perspectives and biases, and even the power dynamics of those who write them. Foucault's concept of discourse is really central here.
Right, the idea that knowledge and power are intertwined. New historicists drawing on Foucault argue that history is constructed through these discourses, these systems of language and knowledge that reflect and reinforce the dominant ideologies of a particular time and place.
Precisely. So when we study history, we're not just uncovering facts, we're grappling with interpretations that have been filtered through these discourses.
It's like trying to see the past through a lens that's constantly being adjusted by those in power. It makes you think about how historical events are often presented as inevitable, as if there was only one possible outcome.
Right.
But new historicism suggests that there were always alternative paths, different perspectives that might have been silenced or marginalized.
That's key insight. New historicism encourages us to uncover those hidden voices, to consider the perspectives of those who were excluded from the dominant historical narrative. It's about recognizing the complexity and multiplicity of the past, challenging that idea of a single monolithic truth, a lot like how reader response theory challenged the notion of a single fixed meaning in literature.
I see the connection. Both theories are about recognizing the role of power and perspective in shaping our understanding. It makes you wonder, though, if there's even such a thing as objectivity, whether in history or literature.
That's a question that's still being debated. But just recognizing that subjective nature of interpretation doesn't mean we abandon the search for truth or meaning. It just means we approach these pursuits with a greater awareness of the forces at play.
And this focus on power and discourse, it isn't limited to history. It's also central to postcolonial theory, which examines the lasting impact of colonialism on culture, identity, and power.
Absolutely. Postcolonial theory explores how colonizers imposed their language, culture, and values on colonized peoples, and how those who were colonized resisted and negotiated these impositions.
One of the most powerful concepts in postcolonial theory is Orientalism, a term coined by Edward Said. He showed how Western cultures have constructed this distorted and often romanticized image of the East, reinforcing a sense of Western superiority.
Right. It's about creating a narrative that justifies colonialism, making it seem like this benevolent act, rather than a system of exploitation. Said argued that these narratives, spread through literature, art, even scientific discourse, had a profound impact on how both the West and the East viewed themselves and each other.
Our source material also mentions Gayatri Spivak, a prominent postcolonial theorist, who has focused on the complexities of identity and representation, particularly for marginalized groups, like women in formerly colonized regions.
Spivak's work is crucial for understanding how power operates through discourse. To silence and marginalize certain voices, she challenges that assumption that Western intellectual frameworks can adequately represent the experiences and perspectives of those who have been colonized and oppressed.
So in a way, postcolonial theory is about deconstructing those dominant narratives and power structures that have shaped our understanding of the world and giving voice to those who have been historically marginalized and silenced. It seems like this thread of deconstructing power structures runs through so many of these theories.
You're right. And it's a thread that continues with feminist theories, which have been so instrumental in reshaping literary cultural studies. They've challenged the traditional male-dominated literary canon and developed new frameworks for analyzing and understanding the experiences of women as they're represented in texts.
Feminist theories have gone through their own evolution, haven't they? Our source material mentions different waves of feminism, each with its own set of concerns and priorities.
Exactly. It's important to remember that feminism Well, it's not a monolithic movement. It encompasses a lot of diverse perspectives and approaches.
Early feminist criticism focused on exposing how patriarchal ideologies have shaped literature and culture. Critics like Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir, they challenge those traditional representations of women in literature, arguing that women have often been portrayed as passive submissive and defined in relation to men.
Right. And these early feminist critiques laid the groundwork for later waves of feminist thought, which explore the complexities of gender construction and representation in even greater depth.
Our source material talks about gynocriticism, a term coined by Elaine Showalter, to describe a form of feminist criticism that focuses on women's writing as its own distinct and valuable literary tradition.
Showalter's work was so important, it helped establish the study of women's writing as a legitimate field of academic inquiry. Gynocriticism seeks to uncover those unique perspectives, themes, and styles that characterize women's writing, challenging the traditional male-dominated literary canon. It's about reclaiming women's voices and experiences in literature.
It's interesting how this focus on women's writing coincides with the rise of French feminist theory, which drew on psychoanalysis and post-structuralism to explore the construction of gender and sexuality in language and culture.
French feminist theorists like Helene Cixous and Lucie Irigaray, they argue that Western thought is fundamentally phallocentric, meaning it privileges male perspectives and experiences and positions women as the other. They examined how language itself can actually reinforce patriarchal ideologies and called for new forms of feminine writing that would disrupt these traditional modes of expression.
So it's not just about the content of literature, but about the very structures of language that shape our understanding of gender. It makes you realize how even seemingly neutral words and phrases can carry these hidden biases.
Precisely. And French feminist theory encourages us to deconstruct those assumptions and to consider alternative ways of understanding gender and sexuality.
Our source material also touches on the work of Julia Kristeva, a French feminist theorist, who explored this concept of the semiotic. It sounds pretty complex.
It is a complex concept, but
Let's
essentially
get that.
Kristeva argued that the semiotic is this pre-linguistic realm of meaning associated with the maternal body and with the rhythms and flows of bodily experience. It's a realm that resists the order and logic of the symbolic order, which is associated with language and patriarchal structures.
So the semiotic represents this kind of subversive energy that can disrupt the dominant symbolic order.
Exactly. Kristeva saw the semiotic as a source of creativity and transgression, particularly evident in avant-garde art and literature, which often challenge conventional modes of representation and expression.
It's fascinating how feminist theories have expanded our understanding of literature and culture, making us more aware of those power dynamics at play in how we construct meaning and represent the world. But it seems like there was another important shift within feminist theory, a recognition that woman isn't a monolithic category.
You're right. Feminist theories continue to evolve, engaging more explicitly with the experiences of women of color. This intersectional approach recognizes that women's experiences are shaped not just by gender, but also by race, class, sexuality, and other factors.
This led to the development of Black feminist theory, which has made invaluable contributions to our understanding of how interlocking systems of oppression shape the lives of Black women.
Thinkers like Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, and Alice Walker have challenged both white feminist theory and patriarchal structures within Black communities, arguing that Black women's experiences are unique and can't be fully captured by either framework.
Right.
They've shown us that we can't talk about gender without talking about race, class, and other forms of social inequality.
This focus on intersectionality has been so important. In broadening the scope of feminist thought and activism, it's about recognizing the complexity of identity and the ways in which different forms of oppression intersect and reinforce each other.
And as these conversations about identity and power continued, a new movement emerged in the 1990s that further challenged our understanding of sexuality and gender: queer theory.
Queer theory has been both celebrated and contested. For its radical approach to sexuality and gender norms, it challenges those traditional binary oppositions of male, female, and heterosexual, homosexual, arguing that these categories are socially constructed and fluid.
Right. Instead of seeing sexuality and gender as fixed and essential categories, queer theory views them as performative, meaning that they're created through our actions and expressions, rather than reflecting some inherent qualities.
So our identities aren't predetermined, but something we actively create and negotiate throughout our lives.
Exactly. This challenges the traditional notion of a stable and unified self, opening up possibilities for multiple and fluid identities.
One of the most influential figures in queer theory is Judith Butler, whose work on gender performativity has been groundbreaking.
Butler argues that gender is not an expression of some inner truth or essence, but rather a series of repeated actions and performances that create the illusion of a stable and coherent identity.
It's like we're all actors on a stage, constantly performing our gender roles.
And she argues that this performance isn't always conscious. We often enact gender norms without even realizing it. It's so ingrained in our culture and upbringing.
It makes you think about all those subtle ways we're taught to perform our gender from a very young age.
You're right. And queer theory challenges us to be more aware of these performances and to consider the possibility of disrupting them, of creating new and more fluid ways, of expressing our gender identities.
Queer theory has also been instrumental in challenging heteronormativity, that assumption that heterosexuality is the natural or default sexual orientation.
Absolutely. Queer theorists have exposed the ways in which heteronormativity operates through institutions, laws, and cultural norms to marginalize and oppress those who don't conform to heterosexual expectations.
So it's not just about individual attitudes and beliefs, it's about these systemic structures of power that privilege heterosexuality and disadvantage other sexual orientations.
Precisely. Queer theory encourages us to be critical of these structures and to imagine alternative ways of organizing society that are more inclusive and affirming of diverse sexualities and gender expressions.
It's incredible how all these different theories, from reader response to post-colonialism to feminism and queer theory, have expanded our understanding of literature and culture, challenging those traditional assumptions, and opening up these new ways of thinking about identity, power, and meaning.
It's been quite a journey. But even with all these theories, we've only scratched the surface. And as we move into the final part of this deep dive, we'll see how these strands of thought have shaped contemporary literary studies.
I'm eager to see how these ideas continue to evolve and influence our understanding of literature and culture. It's amazing how all these theories have challenged traditional assumptions about literature and opened up so many new ways of thinking about identity, power, and meaning.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground, from the foundations of literary theory to some of the most influential movements of the 20th century. And as we move into the 21st century, we see these new trends emerging that really build upon those foundations. One that's particularly interesting is digital humanities.
Digital humanities. It's a field that's really exploded in recent years. I know it involves using technology to study literature and culture, but how exactly does that work?
Well, it's all about harnessing computational tools and methods to analyze texts in new ways. For example, we can use text mining to identify patterns and trends in massive data sets of literary works. Or we can create visualizations that map the relationships between different authors, texts, or even concepts.
So it's like having this super-powered magnifying glass for literature. We can zoom in on details that would be impossible to see with the naked eye, and zoom out to get this big picture view of literary history and evolution.
Exactly. And digital humanities isn't just about analyzing what's already been written. It's also expanding the very definition of literature to include new forms of digital expression.
Like social media posts, blogs, video games, things that wouldn't have been considered literature in the past.
Right. Digital humanities is blurring those lines between traditional literary texts and these newer forms of digital creation. It's recognizing that meaning-making happens at all sorts of online spaces.
And this is leading to some fascinating new insights. It's not just about studying literature in a new way. It's about understanding how technology is changing the very nature of storytelling and cultural expression.
Yeah, it's a truly exciting field that's transforming how we think about literature and its role in the digital age. And speaking of changing times, another trend that's gaining momentum in literary studies is eco-criticism.
Eco-criticism. That's the study of how literature and the environment interact, right? I feel like it's become even more relevant in recent years as we grapple with the realities of climate change.
Absolutely. Eco-criticism is all about exploring how environmental issues are represented in texts and how literature can shape our understanding of the natural world and our place in it.
It's not just about nature writing anymore, is it?
No, not at all. Eco-criticism encompasses all genres, from classic novels to science fiction to poetry, and it's concerned with a wide range of environmental issues: pollution, deforestation, climate change, the relationship between humans and animals. It's all fair game.
So eco-critics are like literary detectives. They're looking for clues about how our relationship with the environment has evolved over time and how literature has both reflected and shaped that relationship.
That's a great way to put it. And eco-criticism isn't just about analyzing texts. It's also about using literature to promote environmental awareness and action.
So it has this ethical and political dimension as well.
Definitely. Eco-critics are concerned with issues of environmental justice and sustainability. They want to use literature to raise awareness about the environmental challenges we face and to inspire people to work towards a more sustainable future.
It's inspiring to see how literary studies are evolving to address the most pressing issues of our time. From digital humanities to eco-criticism, these new trends are really pushing the boundaries of the field and showing us that literature has the power to engage with real-world problems.
Exactly. Literary theory isn't just an abstract exercise. It's a way of understanding ourselves and our culture and our relationship with the world around us.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind tour through the evolution of literary theory. From those foundations to the latest trends, we've covered a lot of ground.
And I hope it sparked your curiosity. Remember, there's always more to explore, more to uncover. The world of literature is vast and ever-changing, and literary theory gives us the tools to navigate it with a critical and insightful eye.
So keep reading, keep questioning, and keep exploring. That's what makes the study of literature so endlessly fascinating.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.